Hi, this is Mark Bowen, the Managing Editor of Lynchpin Media. In the latest of our Deep Dive series, I spoke to Craig Wishart, the CIO of KPMG, and Ben Allard, the VP and General Manager of Apptio for the APAC region. Hi both. Could you both tell me a little bit about your roles and the companies you work for, please?
Do you want to go first, Craig?
No, please.
Oh, sure. So Mark, I'm the General Manager and the Vice President for Apptio for Asia Pacific. And just a little bit of context around Apptio. So we're the leading provider of technology business management solutions. And really what that means is how do we help organizations continuously align technology investments around their business strategy?
Okay.
Yep, terrific. Okay. And my role, Mark, is the Chief Information Officer for KPMG Australia. And I'm also the head of ASPAC Technology Services Group, which supports about 50,000 people in the ASPAC region.
Okay, perfect. Okay, and a question for Ben. KPMG Australia leverages support from your company and TBM from your company. Can you explain a little bit more about what TBM is and what your company can offer in that respect?
Yeah, sure. So look, at its core, technology business management is really around having value-based conversations with all stakeholders across the business. So regardless of whether we're talking about people from the business, whether we're talking about people from finance, whether we're talking about people from technology, it's bringing that group of individuals together really to have a data-driven discussion around how they can continuously improve technology and its business outcomes for the organization. That really revolves around a number of things, creating trust with transparency. How do you make sure the portfolio is aligned to the business strategy, as I mentioned before? How do you make sure that the company has the right mix in terms of investment and innovation and doing all these things at speed? So when a company is disrupted, whether it be through changes in market conditions, whether it be things like the pandemic, where is there the opportunity to have that data at someone's fingertips in order to be able to make those decisions at speed? When you look at Apptio, there are three core parts of our solution that sort of address what most organizations are looking for. And it's, regardless of whether you look at, a company that has technology deployed on premise, whether they're leveraging the cloud or looking to accelerate their use of the cloud, whether they're delivering things via project or agile methodologies, we've got a wide variety of solutions that sort of address a company's maturity, regardless of where they are in terms of those use of those types of technologies. And that really allows organizations to be able to get started with technology business management, regardless of their maturity, and then be able to progress over time, Mark.
Okay, thank you. A question for you, Craig. How successful has your adoption of Apptio's solutions been and TBM in general?
Yeah, look, I think it's a good question. I think the question for me more is that, how would we measure success and what would be the things that we would say that by doing this, something has changed, something has improved. We talk a lot about the changing role of what we think is the CIO, what I call the T's and C's have shifted, right? Which is more trust and credibility is going to drive your influence and drive the authority that you have within the organization you support. And so we centered trust really around a couple of key words, but one of them was transparency. How transparent could we get to and could we be with our technology costs? And then from that, how could we take that transparency, if you like, and turn that into insights that people could use to help shape their own business and control their own cost base? And so on that basis, I'd say we've been very successful. We've been able to take our budget and distill it down to a level using the TBM taxonomy to a point that people can understand where their spend is. And I think that's become increasingly important in a cloud world where that visibility, if you're lost in that consumption-based pricing, shifted from where budgets were once held in technology and data centers and in fixed hardware to more public cloud offerings where people often get bill shock because they simply don't know what it costs to run something. And so by leveraging cloudability and leveraging the TBM taxonomy, we've been able to show people not only what the cost is of their service, but to help them understand how they can influence how that service is used to lessen their cost. And I think, those things come together, and firstly, it builds trust, but the second thing it does, it builds credibility that you are somebody who can be trusted to work with the business and help them run their business. And I think that's a fundamental shift for the role.
Okay, and a question for you both. How can IT leaders use TBM to engage boards in a meaningful discussion about ensuring technology is delivering business value?
Ben?
Yeah, look, I think there's a number of ways, Mark, but I think the core component is when you look at the ability to be able to capture the expected business value of a technology investment. So all the way back from the ideation of that investment through to the actual delivery of that, and then be able to report on the actual versus expected benefits. So to be able to take that myth of, well, what does it actually cost to be able to deliver investment? How do I translate that into business terms and business value? And then be able to track execution. And then if that investment isn't actually delivering on the expected business benefits, then the ability to be able to reevaluate the investment strategy and look at how you can apply resources differently. Like, that's a core component. But I want to make sure, like, when we do talk about that board level discussion and that business value, it's really around extending beyond just ROI metrics and to look at focusing on areas, whether it be reduction in cyber incidents, whether it be looking at increasing use of self-service products and services. That translation of technology into business terms is really that leap and having that differentiated conversation with the board. And a perfect example of that, one of our customers, European customers, Saxo Bank, they actually justified an investment in terms of to be able to use machine learning to be able to rapidly change how they onboard customers and enable them to be able to get up and running within their trading platform and to be able to reduce that onboarding time down to about 1 hour. Again, so how does that then translate into something that is board relevant with that type of business impact?
Craig?
Yeah, look, I'll further it by saying I think boards are still, as executives, are still learning what questions to ask. I think that the separation of technology from business process now is almost impossible. The two of them are very clearly together, and boards and executives are learning now how best to engage with technology leaders to ask the right questions. But I do think consistently they ask these sorts of questions, which is, what's the best way that we could prioritize our investments in technology? What's the best way that we could start to think through measuring return on investment, either through profitability or productivity or even, end user value? I think the other piece they're looking for is, what does it really cost? Like, what does it really cost to run our business? And what opportunity have we got for either lessening that cost or getting more value from that cost? I think the third thing is definitely we need to move quickly. Everyone talks about speed. I tend to think about velocity because at least it's speed with direction. I think there's a lot of people going fast. I'm not sure everyone's going fast the same direction at times. So we talk about velocity. You've got to be on the same path. And then the last one is really, how do you have these balanced discussions, if you like, at an executive or a board level, where you're confident that the people underneath you and around you all agree? And so you need something to land on, which is a data set that is consistent, which is the TBM framework, and then surety, if you like, and trust that the data that's wrapped around that is accurate and has integrity. And so I think for boards and executive, they're just saying, look, help us understand your business, help us understand where we can influence more. But by the way, we're probably going to have some questions, which is around how can we use technology more in our business and how could we do it better and what could we do with you to help you do more?
Okay, thank you, Craig. Can I just go back to something you referred to a few minutes ago? You were talking about CIOs operating under a different set of T&Cs nowadays, trust and credibility. Could you just elaborate a bit more on that, please?
Yeah, look, I think if I go back, in the early days of my career, it was pretty simple, to be honest. You had a data center, you bought hardware, and you told the business, come back in 3 months when we've procured it, we've racked it, and we'll put some software on it, and you come back and we'll tell you what it's going to cost. And I think, to be honest, if I go back to 2000, that's how far I'll go back, HTML was emerging, wireless markup language for mobiles was emerging. In fact, the three dominant mobile handsets were Motorola, Nokia, and Ericsson. The iPhone wasn't going to come for another 6 years. But something around about 2010 really changed everything, and that was our people who were joining our business were far more technically literate. They had an expectation really about experience. So about 10 years ago, I think the game shifted on what a good technology experience was. And speed came with that. So people were saying, you know what, I've studied technology at uni. I can write an app for that, or I can get an app for that, and SaaS was emerging. So there was a big shift, I think, about 10 years ago where technology became far more accessible. You didn't have to go to a team and say, buy me some hardware, buy me some software, and here's $1 million, $2 million worth of kit. They said, we've just spoken to the vendor, it's available, and we're going to sign up and we're going to use them. And suddenly, for the CIO who didn't get it, they were disintermediated pretty quickly. So I think we've seen a shift in CIOs saying, if we're going to be at the front end of the conversation, if we're going to be considered to be at the front end of decisions, we've got to have two things. We've got to be trusted, and we've got to have credibility that we can back up what we say we will do to help this business go forward. And that's why I think the game shifted, because 20 years ago, you didn't have a choice. If you wanted something done, technology would lock you up and say, guess what, I'll see you in 6 months. You had no choice. Everything changed, I think, with mobility and SaaS offerings in the market that suddenly gave the business a choice of whether they used you or didn't. And from my perspective, I think the only way to stay up the front and be influential is to have trust and credibility.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Ben, a question for you. Is it fair to say that CIOs don't have a clear view of all of their costs relating to technology that would enable them to make an informed decision?
Look, I think it is fair, Mark, but I think it's in the context of making sure you're talking about the total cost of ownership of technology. So when, as Craig was sort of referring, there may be different components that make up a particular piece of technology, whether it's internal or externally facing to customers. But you need to be able to understand what are all the components that make that up. What does that look like in terms of not just the cost to execute or to build, but then to be able to look at ongoing run and maintenance, and also to be able to do that in the context of business products, processes, and services. So when we were talking about that conversation around credibility with the board or operating under a new set of T's and C's, it's no longer sufficient for someone in a CIO role to be talking in the context of widgets and bits and technology. There needs to be a business-led conversation around what is the impact that the technology is having, where can it help and influence and change the execution in terms of business. So CIOs, I think, they have had a view of cost, but it's been a traditional view of cost based on more of a finance cost center view, which doesn't provide that context, fails to expose levers, and really doesn't provide that ability to be able to have a conversation around cost, performance, value, trade-off decisions.
Mark, it might, if I could just add something to that.
Sure.
I think too, again, if I take us all down memory lane, your CIOs typically came out of two areas. They came out of infrastructure or they came out of applications. And so you had these very heavy, technically capable people who are now running quite large functions. It's not uncommon today to see people come out from the side of the business, and they're put into those roles primarily because they have trust and credibility within the business, but they're also put in there because they have a commercial sense. And so I also think that CIOs are having to become far more commercial now. If it's true that we're doing more in the SaaS world than the physical building in some cases, then there's more of a commercial need. And to that end, I think those sorts of people understand TBM pretty quickly, because it really is numbers, understanding a framework. But for the traditional folk who have come up through apps and infrastructure, it is a whole new language to learn. And I think, where it lands and how the organisation uses it will really be dependent on the person they've got in that role. They're either going to have a bent towards understanding frameworks and commercial, I'll say, reality now, or they're going to try and hold on to the way that they used to do it, which is using spreadsheets and using vendors to calculate their cost base.
And Mark, that's being obviously accelerated as you look at companies making wholesale changes to a product-based operating model. That's accelerating that need to be able to bring that commercial mindset in a business-orientated capacity back into the technology part of the organisation, or at least improve the partnership between those two parts of the organisation as well.
Okay, thank you. A related question, really, but do Australian businesses feel pressurized to reduce their IT spend because of an inability to demonstrate value?
In short, the answer is yes, Mark, because it's that inability to be able to demonstrate value or exposing levers that means that they're unable to successfully engage the business in opportunities to be able to redirect resources or allocate funds to things like digital or growth initiatives. So it's a reactionary response to the inability to be able to demonstrate value, to be able to communicate and partner with the business. And therefore, the net result is you fall back on the need to be able to reduce costs. In many cases, do that without a medium to long-term understanding of the impact of those decisions as well, which again has a further impact on the business in out years.
And Craig?
Look, I think it comes down, of course, to the business. It comes down to the leadership. It comes down to the trust. My sense is that if you're unable to answer the basic questions, then there will be a feeling that your budget or your fiscal management is not where it should be, and as such, there's probably space in there for cost. I think for those who get it right, there's the flip side, which is the question I see now being asked, which is, now that we can see what you are spending, it would seem that we should be doing more. If we could do more, where would we do it? Or alternatively, where could we carve the wallet up differently so that we spent more over here than over here? So I think one of the great advantages of the framework itself is it's relatively straightforward. It's simple to understand, but I think the real sweet spot for CIOs is to be able to take that TBM costing model and push it up against the set of services and products that the firm delivers, so that you get a product cost, a service cost, not just what does it cost to run a laptop, what are my network charges, what are my data center or cloud infrastructure charges, actually getting it up to a level that says, to run this business effectively in the functions that we have, this is where we're putting our investment. And I think when CIOs talk about investments, the conversation shifts again, as opposed to this is where our cost is.
Yeah, and Mark, coming back to that Saxo Bank example that we talked about earlier, through that cultural change, through that shift in terms of using, technology business management as a framework, they were actually able to look at increasing their technology spend by upward of 40% based on demonstrating some of those business results and changing that conversation from a focus on what are you doing, why is it costing so much, to what else can we do in order to be able to deliver more value for the organisation.
Okay, Craig and Ben, thank you very much.